Welcome, Red Ice members. We are talking with Mary Croft about money, banking, law, and commerce, and much more for that matter. A very interesting conversation. And what I'd like to do right now is to get into a little bit more and just to clarify a few things about what actually happens when you are born, so to speak. We're going to get into this about birth certificates and what actually happens that a corporation, so to speak, is being set up alongside you as a man. So Mary, if you will, in this day and age, before you, in the first segment when you were talking about after a certain date, people were obliged to go and register their child, basically. So what happens today when that takes place? At least if we are talking to it in the context of the U.S. and Canada, they go and they register the child to their government, so to speak. What happens at that point?
Yeah, it's really it is quite a recent thing. And that is prior to the 30s, nobody registered births. That was not necessary, and because apparently, I don't know, but apparently it's because it was registered in the family Bible. I mean, you wrote down the child's name and when he was born, and that was sort of done, right? But what happened due to the bankruptcy? They said we are going to have to capture the future labor and productivity of the people because we no longer have the minerals, the gold, the silver. We have nothing left to pay the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the interest on the loan that they lent us. Well, of course, the foolishness was that they ever got entangled with the World Bank in the first place, but which is unfortunate because we were tricked into it. But that's the way it is. So then they said, well, what else can we give them? We've given them all the gold and silver, and by the way, there is no gold in Fort Knox, that same cliche. So then they said, the only thing we have is the productivity and the future labor of the people of the country. They will create the interest that we can pay the IMF. Otherwise, we're in deep trouble. So that's why, 50 years ago, well, not 50, okay, let's say 80.
Yes.
People just there weren't any crimes because there was no win for anybody. I'm not saying there was zero crimes. I'm saying there weren't anywhere near the number there are now because there was no win for there to be crimes. Consequently, I think it was Thomas Zaz who says the reason there are sick people is because there's doctors, not the other way around. In other words, they needed us to break the law so they could fine us in order to get the funds to pay off the interest on the national debt. So they started creating these absolutely absurd statutes. I mean, I don't have to tell you. There's over 60 million statutes, at least on this continent, where one false move and you've broken the law. Allegedly, apparently, that's what they say.
Yeah.
What about seatbelt laws? You weren't wearing a seatbelt. Well, who did that hurt? So that's not it. It's if we catch you, we get to fine you. And if we fine you, then we have that much more to pay the World Bank in interest. Well, as you know, the interest is just now completely vertical. So what happened was they said, what's the best way to do this? And that is tax them on every turn, every move they make. Applying for university, they have to put a signature. They have to an application. You used to be able to think back to when you and I were kids. I don't know how young you are, but anyway, they used to be able to go into a bank, say, you have bank accounts to offer, and they say, yep, and they'd hand you a signature card, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's your account number, your passbook, and thanks for the signature card so that when you write a check, we know what your signature is. And that was it. And now you have to apply for an account?
Yes.
It's insanity. And you have to agree to the innumerable terms and conditions of this unilateral contract. And and then they have your signature. And I don't mean on a signature card. They have your signature to this contract. So guess what? They start out by robbing you. Whereas that never used to happen. Not when I was a kid. So once again, I say you cannot go through a day without violating at least one of these statutes. Why? Because they want to fine you. They have to fine you because they're sunk. They know it's over if they can't pay the interest on the national debt.
Yes, to have traffic tickets, kind of minor things on the surface at least, this brings in the money in order to keep this system of debt going, isn't that right?
That's right, but as I explained before, the money really doesn't keep the system afloat.
Yes.
What it does is it pays people like judges and municipalities and the people who are actually confiscating the cash. Because remember, when you pay any alleged debt with a debt, you've doubled the debt. So it isn't about offsetting corporate debt. If they truly and honestly wanted their books balanced, they would say, would you please sign this for me? Then I can take it over here. Then we can simply go into our computers and offset the debt that we just created by charging you. We can offset the debt. But offset of debt isn't what they want. They want a slave labor force, and they want the people in high places to have our cash, because they use cash the same way we do.
Yes.
Get what we want. So the best way to create a corporation that could be charged for all these misdemeanors and violations of statutes was to have women register their babies' names as a corporation. Now, it just so happens that one of my boys does not have a birth certificate. Now, if I had that was 17 years ago nearly. If I had it to do again, I would have gotten him a birth certificate. And I think even in my book I said we should not have gotten our kids birth certificates. But yes, we should, because we want them to have this unlimited credit. See, we saw it as, with a birth certificate, they're charging us. That's not really true. They're charging the name, and they're holding us as surety, in other words, the guy who has to pay the debt. But now that we know how to do that, see, now I wish I had a birth certificate.
Then it could be turned into a benefit, right?
Exactly. It's now a benefit to us. They can charge all they want, and it's no threat to us now. But back then, we were saying, holy cow, a birth certificate only gets you into trouble because they keep charging it, and we have to pay it. What if he didn't even have a birth certificate? There's no way they could charge him. Well, that's true, too. But, as you say, he's missing out on all the real fun.
I guess it also depends on what you want to do, so to speak. If you want to kind of disconnect from the system altogether, then that would be a good option. But in this case, in case your child or yourself want to maintain within the structure that is there, the governmental society structure or system, then it's a potentially good way to still operate within that in order to benefit from what it can offer us, right?
Precisely, and that's it. We do have an option. We can go sit under a tree in nature and drink the creek water and operate like that, or we can continue the way we've always lived. But yes, we need that almost like a credit card birth certificate in order to operate in commerce. And probably most of us are not willing to give up our lifestyle. Some of us are, of course. I do know people. That's it. We're headed for the hills.
Yes.
We're done, right?
Yes, yes.
They do. They check out of the system. But it might be a little bit difficult for them to leave the country if they choose. And, it's even though the United Nations has their Declaration of Human Rights says any man is free to leave the country and return to his own country. So not really, but it would take a little bit of time, essentially saying, okay, you want me to play the game, drop the documents. This is your problem, not mine.
Right.
So it's possible, but let's face it, most of us want to, shall we say, be free within the system that's actually restricted us. But in other words, we now know there is a way to operate. So I have to come up with a way to get my son handled here.
Do you think that there are people within the system that actually have learned this? Let's say the people within, high up in these big corporations or in insurance, what have you, that actually have discovered this or through some other means have actually learned to utilize the system in this way. Do you think that that's the case here?
Absolutely, no question. They have what's called treasury cards. But keep in mind, this is the very top of the pyramid. And I will say this, a friend of mine was having some kind of meeting,